When my first son was about 6 months old, I decided to finally go to the aerobics class some of my friends were leading at my church. I geared up with a pack and play, a couple of blankets, a bag full of toys, extra baby food, my diaper bag, of course, a yoga mat and some weights, not to mention the heavy infant car seat. It took me 3 or 4 trips to haul it all in. Then I looked around. The other moms, veterans with 2 or 3 kids in tow, were watching my circus with amusement as they settled their own kids into corners of the gym with just a few small toys. A few days later, one of these veteran moms knocked on my door, smiled, and kindly handed me a copy of the book, Confessions of a Slacker Mom. 5 kids and 15 years later, I smile too when I think of that overachieving mom I once was, over-preparing and relentlessly searching for the one right answer to every question. But, as it turns out, I didn't need a guidebook to relax into slacker mom life. I just needed a few more kids and some time. This is the How She Moms podcast, where we talk about how different moms solve the same problems. I'm Whitney Archibald, a mother of 5 kids myself. I collect ideas so you can pick and choose what works for you and your family. As moms, we are students of child development. We read books, we observe our own kids and other people's kids to figure out what's quote-unquote normal, and we recognize the different stages they go through. Some pass by as quickly as a newborn's smile. Some drag like a morning diaper. However, we are less likely to recognize our own stages of development and the remarkable growth we mothers experience as we learn, face and overcome challenges, and perhaps most importantly, chill out a bit. In this season of the How She Moms podcast, we're going to explore this theme of how we mothers evolve and grow, and how our identities shift and develop. I'll be creating episodes about some of the more universal stages we go through that more or less follow the stages of our children, like becoming mothers in the first place, navigating those early toddler years, and parenting elementary kids, teenagers, and eventually adults. But we'll also talk about some of the stages brought about by circumstances and events that change and shape us as mothers. Things like moving, meeting friends and mentors, illnesses for both ourselves and our children, losing people we love, and parenting children with disabilities. Of course, I'll also include some of the more practical episodes, like how to homeschool and how to create a bedtime routine. To kick off this theme, I invited 3 mothers, all in different stages of motherhood, to talk about how motherhood has influenced their growth and development. We met for a Zoom roundtable last month. I'll let my guests introduce themselves.
I'm Georgia. I'm the elder of the group. I'm turning 60 this fall, and I am the mother, grandmother, and stepmother to about 23.5 people that I adore.
Wow.
7 children, well, 4 children, 3 stepchildren, and they're all married. So in reality, I have like 14 children.
Whoa.
And I was married for 20 years, then divorced, a single mother for 3 years, and I've been remarried in a blended family now for going on 16 years. So that's been an adventure all by itself. I worked as a choreographer during my first life, and then as a massage therapist during my next life, and the whole life I was volunteering as a parenting educator.
Georgia Anderson is now a Gottman-trained parenting coach. She hosts retreats for women and couples, teaches classes and workshops, and coaches individuals and families. You can find more about all her fabulous services at knowhowmom.com, and you can follow her on Instagram at knowhowmom. The next guest is at a bit of a different stage, currently parenting a bunch of teenagers and young adults. Cheryl Cardall just started a podcast of her own last month.
It's called Fight Like a Mother, and it is for parents raising kids with specifically mental health challenges. We'll probably talk about some other challenges as well. And I'm walking in those trenches right now, raising some kids with some mental health challenges. And I have 5. They're ages 10 to 21. I have 4 boys and a girl. And I have been encouraging moms and hoping to strengthen families for the last decade. And just in the last couple of years, it's focused more on kids' mental health and some parenting strategies we've learned as we have parented some really challenging things. So kind of had the fire hose of having to change my parenting tactics pretty radically. But it's been a good thing. It's been a really good thing.
You can also follow Cheryl on Instagram at supermamas4real with the number 4, which is where I first met her. And the third guest is Maris Young, a fabulous writer and podcaster who hosts the Young Honest Mother podcast and blogs at younghonestmother.com. She's going to introduce herself a bit more and then launch us into the first part of our discussion about becoming a mother and then early motherhood.
So my name is Maris. I am the mother of one child. My son Milo is 3.
Awesome.
And my husband and I just celebrated our 5-year wedding anniversary on Friday. So I really came into creating for the motherhood space when, after the postpartum haze wore off with my son, I realized that I had no idea what to expect. And during my baby shower, I remember sitting in a circle of women who, many of them were already mothers. And I asked, kind of pleading with them, like, please tell me, what was your experience like? Like, what did you go through? What were some of the challenges? What were some of the things that were fun and joyful? And I had such a range of responses. They were kind of on a spectrum and really stratified actually from one another. So on one end, people would say things like, oh, it's just going to be so amazing. You're going to love that new baby smell. Oh, so very just like rainbows and butterflies. And then on the other hand, I would have people say things like, well, I don't want to scare you, so check back with me after you have the baby and then we'll talk. And I just felt like it was such a disservice because I was genuinely curious to hear from people about what their experiences had been like. And due to feeling either shamed about their own experiences or unsure about if they could trust people to share what they had gone through, like the challenges, people were choosing to keep quiet. And so after I had my son and I kind of, had my bearings straight a little bit, I started younghonestmother.com, and I just started writing about my own experience and the things that I was realizing and the musings that I was kind of tumbling over in my head. And my mission is to bear the torch for meaningful conversations surrounding all things marriage, motherhood, and modern home economics in all honesty. I had a very romantic, rosy, fantastical image of motherhood in my mind. My mom was the mother of 4 kids, and she was a stay-at-home mom throughout most of our lives. And she's very nurturing. She did a lot of hands-on activities with us, a lot of crafts. She always made our meals. We rarely went out to restaurants. Our house is always like perfectly decorated. So I had this vision that like, that's what a mom looks like. And even though it was largely subconscious, it definitely started to come out and convict me after my son was born. I feel, while I was still pregnant, I had in my mind that I would continue with my full-time job, which already was in conflict with the ideal that I had in my mind, because my mom never worked outside the home when we were younger. But I loved my career. I thought I would have the baby and go back to work. And I really did not consider who would watch the baby or how I would actually go to work and be able to manage like pumping and breastfeeding and like being a wife, managing all of the household things, and also having a child. And so after all of those things came to fruition, I really had to take a look at what I was expecting of myself or what I thought other people were expecting of me, and come to terms with what felt right for me in that moment and what felt right for my family in that moment. And it actually was catalyzed by my mom and my sister-in-law kind of sitting me down at separate times. They had not spoken to each other or had any plans to do this, but like had many interventions with me and just said, Maris, we see that you are really running yourself ragged trying to do all these things. Who are you asking for help? Why aren't you asking for help? Why are you trying to take all of these things on yourself? And I hadn't stopped to consider those questions. everything felt like it was moving so fast. From the time I gave birth, I had 6 weeks of maternity leave, and then I was back in the office working 40 plus hours, and there was no space to, have these philosophical debates with myself or with my husband or anything. And that really encouraged and inspired me to sit down and look at the ideals that I'd carried with me unknowingly. And it presented an opportunity for me to, like I said, construct a new model that felt authentic to who I am as a person, who my child is as a person, and who my husband is as a person.
I think we always begin motherhood bringing with us what we sucked in as a child. So I started my experience in a huge family. I was the 8th of 11 children, all born within 15 years of each other. So, I look back on my overall experience, wonderful. Having said that, I'm also going to share with you some of the challenges that came with being one of 11. I was afraid in some ways. I felt anxiety about becoming a mother. And not because I wasn't happy as a child. I think I had a good childhood. But I saw my mother truly, like, in so many ways, give up her life to be my mother and the mother of my 10 siblings. And remarkably, she still did many things. She was a composer and she composed music, but it was always as a volunteer. She really volunteered her life. And there's a beautiful side to that, and there's a challenging side to that, as I observed. And I honestly think I lived in that habit nature for a couple of, at least a decade. I kind of held on to my choreography career that was part-time. And if it worked out, my husband could work out 2 days a week, or if I was doing a show at the time, 5 days a week, to come home at night and I'd run to the theater and do my thing and come back, but make sure that all the babies were taken care of and everything was set out. And I balanced these 2 hats and really made my primary job taking care of those kids. So I also felt, because of my religious upbringing and my culture, that was what you do. You jump in and you give and you raise children, and that's your contribution to the world. I still think that's a very noble contribution. I really do. I just don't think I felt I had a choice. In my early motherhood, I had a harder time. I loved my babies. I wanted to do a good job, but I think I had an underlying anxiety about the needs, the heavy needs that they had, and the me that was disappearing. I also got to recognize and admit that I'm not, we all have favorite stages of parenthood possibly, and I had to admit to myself that I loved the relational part of the older child. Like, I loved being the mother of teenagers. Absolutely, that was my sweet spot. I loved it. I had a lot of teenage energy, I guess, and I loved having kids in my house and enjoying them and being involved in all the things my kids did in sports and the arts. And that was a super fun time for me. And when they're teenagers, they're starting to really branch out and blossom in ways you don't expect. And it's kind of an adventure. And if you know me, you know I love adventure. I know not knowing what's around the next corner and wondering what's there. So that's what teenagers are like. Right, Cheryl?
Yes. You never know.
They're like one grand adventure. And so having this adventure of watching them blossom, watching them try on different ways of being, which teenagers are so good at. One day they've got spiky hair, and one day they're an artist or whatever. They're trying all that stuff on. I love that stage. I just ate it up. And I loved having their friends around and enjoying that. So for me, motherhood just got better and better and better. I now feel like I'm at a stage, I know I'm at a stage because I can't boss them around at all, is where I'm walking beside these adult people who are now going through what I did as a young parent. And it's incredibly rewarding to me to learn to step out of the role of their leader and step into the role of a mentor sometimes, but mostly a friend, mostly someone who walks beside them, who enjoys them, who's curious about their choices and what they're going to do, and who can support them. You know, as my children explore and become who they're meant to become, it lifts me in a way I never understood.
That's beautiful. How did you adjust to empty nest life?
Oh, it was so easy. I was like, bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. And not that it didn't tug at my heartstrings. I mean, there were definitely tears when they made the final cut, you know, and walked out the door. There were definitely tears because you've shared so much together and you've had so much suffering and joy and all the in between together. There was so much of that. There was definitely a shift, a need to shift my perspective and my energy towards something. But I tried to do that as my children grew. Like when, you know, I became a hiking fanatic, kind of when my kids were moving more toward junior high. And I thought, you know, what do I need to renew myself now? Because those early years, you are giving, 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 giving. And I wanted to renew myself, and I just had to experiment with different ways to renew myself and to resurrect the me or find the new me that was in there after the experience of motherhood. I became more fully myself when my kids left, and a new me that didn't exist before, because I'd walked this path with these kids.
And finally, here's Cheryl talking about her experience becoming a mother.
So I'm the youngest of 7. I became an aunt when I was 8. So I had nieces and nephews that I babysat probably from 10 on. And I majored in early childhood education. I love little kids. I love babies. I love, you know, preschoolers. I've been a preschool teacher on and off. I've taught kindergarten. I'm good with little kids. Okay. That's one of my gifts I've been given. And then I became a mom and realized that was a completely different ballgame than being a teacher or babysitting nieces and nephews. And it kind of threw me because I thought, wait, I thought I was going to be so good at this. And I realized that, like I said, I've struggled with postpartum mood disorders and things like that. And I thought that was a problem with me. Well, why don't I love this more? When I finally realized what was happening, I got some good therapy, I got on some medication, and all of a sudden I found joy in mothering again. And I think that was a huge transition for me, was to realize that it wasn't that I wasn't a good mom. It wasn't that I wasn't enjoying it. It was that I had something else kind of blocking that joy from coming. But also I really did enjoy my little kids. I did enjoy, you know, the cute things they say. And I really loved nap time. And, you know, I love doing Play-Doh and reading books and things like that. And so I really did enjoy those early motherhood years. And I was good at it. I knew how to do this. I kind of got into my groove and I knew how to do this. And I think I was the opposite of Georgia. Georgia found her sweet spot with the teenagers, and my teenagers came and I was like, whoa, what do I do now? Because I don't have any control. I don't have any control of them. I do enjoy my teenagers now, but it's been a transition for sure, because it wasn't something that came naturally to me. Was parenting those kids in bigger bodies who still need you, who sometimes act like toddlers, but it's a whole different set of skills. And so that was a big transition for me, was when my kids started to get older.
I thought I'd take a minute in the middle here and talk about how she emails. And by she, I mean me. One of the reasons I send weekly emails is to provide you with things you can't get just by listening to the podcast. Part of that is a list of the resources I mention in each episode, including any resources the guests are giving away for free. Sometimes I also send out things like worksheets that go along with the episodes. I also like to send out fun lists of my favorite books, podcasts, and other things. Next week, I'll be featuring 5 of my favorite children's book authors. My weekly email is also where I send invitations to How She Moms events. Before COVID, these were mostly in person, but this season I'll be doing them on Zoom, and I'm so excited about it. In a few weeks, I'll be hosting a discussion/problem-solving session about bedtime. We'll get together and talk about our bedtime struggles and then share tips, tricks, schedules, and other ideas to help us and our kids sleep easier. For more details about this and other upcoming events, just head to howshemoms.com and sign up for my emails. Perhaps one of the biggest disruptions to our early parenting fantasies is the fact that we haven't met our kids yet. We have no idea what they'll be like and what they'll throw our way. The specific children we end up with and their specific personalities definitely impact the kind of mothers and individuals we become. Here's Marissa again.
I was really excited about having a child. And then I had my child and realized how much he challenged me in every single aspect of my being. And I feel, so he's only 3 right now. And even though that seems like a short amount of time, we have experienced a lot together in these 3 years. And Whitney, you sound very similar to me. I'm someone who is prone to perfectionistic tendencies and overachiever type, someone who likes to have a very clear and cut schedule. And I really want to know like what's coming up next so that I can prepare for it. I'm someone who can be pretty inflexible. I like to just kind of stick to the plan and have everything go a certain way. And I like quiet spaces. I like to have time to do a lot of things on my own. And then my son was born, and he's been a very intense personality since the beginning. Like I remember this moment one day, we were taking a walk around the neighborhood, and I looked down at him in the stroller, and he's in one of those strollers where you attach the car seat on top so that he can look up towards you. I looked down, and his eyebrows were furrowed, and he was just looking around, and was only a couple months old at that point. And that really encapsulates his personality. He's very observant, but very serious. And his personality, I feel like, has been very opposite of my own. He's very clingy. He's very emotional. He's very boisterous. He's very adventurous. And I am, for all intents and purposes, the opposite of those things. I may want things a certain way, but that doesn't mean I'm going to get them in that way. And so how am I going to show up and mother him, even though he's 3 and his main mission in life right now is to test all boundaries and to scream multiple times a day when he doesn't get his way. And that, like, just that behavior in and of itself feels like such an attack on who I am. And I have to remember that he's not out to get me. He's just experiencing life in new ways as his brain is developing, and he's wanting to try things that, you know, are not safe or not good for him in various ways. And I've had a lot of conflict in wanting him to be disciplined and be well behaved and, you know, show up to places and to be, you know, just in our home with us, someone who's respectful and polite and caring. And I wish that I could kind of skip through the stages of, you know, like the work, being in the trenches and helping to build that character alongside him and just, you know, fast forward to the day when he is all of those things. But that's not how life works. So I'm constantly having to ground myself in the knowledge that it's okay not to be in complete control of all these aspects. Like, you're going to wear yourself out if you try to be.
Marissa, one thing that I have learned to say to myself, his behavior does not determine whether I am a good mom or not. But people will tell you different than that, because people will say, oh, you have such a well-behaved child. You're such a good mom.
Yes.
Even as a teenager, oh, they get good grades, they get scholarships, they do this and this and this. It's all your parenting. And I think, no, it's not, because my older two did well in school, got the scholarships, things like that. And it's just, my kids are so different. And so I think that takes some pressure off us.
Yeah.
Thinking that it's our job to make them get good grades, all of these things. We can lead them, be with them, influence them, but most of all, it's about the relationship. My older two boys are fairly compliant and pretty mellow, and my third child came along, and he, from the get-go, had energy, had a mind of his own, and I thought, what am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong as a mom? And finally I got to the point where, okay, this is personality, and I need to learn how to parent him differently than his brothers. He was so much fun. He brought an energy and things to our family that hadn't happened before. And one of my parenting life-changing things was when he was in kindergarten. It was toward the end of his kindergarten year. Actually, it was the summer after kindergarten. And I just had this nagging feeling that he was not ready for first grade. He was not academically ready or socially ready or emotionally ready. And so I went in to talk to the principal of the school, and he avoided me day in, day out, day in, day out. I'd call, I'd email, and I got no response from him. Finally, I did a sit-in at his office, and I said, I will sit here until he comes back. He has to come back sometime today. And when he got there, he was not super happy to see me. And we went in there, and I explained that my son needed to repeat kindergarten. We needed to do kindergarten again. And he said, we don't do that here. We don't repeat grades. And I said, well, my son needs to repeat kindergarten. And all of a sudden I had this powerful feeling that I was in charge of this meeting, because I was the expert on my son. He got close to me, and he shook his finger at me, and he said, I am the principal, and I will make this decision. And I looked at him and I said, I am the mother, and I can pull him out of your school and enroll him somewhere else. But this is my child, and this is what he needs. And I walked out of his office, because he was done at that point. And I said to his assistant, or the school secretary, I said, my son will be doing kindergarten again, and this is the teacher I would like. And she said, okay. And guess what? He repeated kindergarten, and he got that teacher. That was the first time I'd really realized my power as a mom, and my power as a person to advocate for my kids, and how important that was to trust my gut, trust my instincts, that I knew what they needed. And I've had to advocate and fight for them, especially that particular child, multiple times since then. But I always go back to that experience of trusting my instincts and taking my power, that I had that power as a mom. I think we have to embrace that sometimes it's okay not to know what we're doing.
Yes.
That we don't have the answers. And that parenting book we just read, you think, because I would read parenting books and I would think, really? That didn't help me at all. Mm-hmm. And so I think that it's okay to say, I don't have the answers. All I can do at this point is love this child.
Yeah.
All I can do is love them, and we'll go through this together, because it's okay to not know the answers too.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. That's one of the challenges that I've really had to face is, I'm someone who in college, I met my now husband in college, but back then he was my boyfriend, and I would get to the first day of classes, first semester, and they give you the syllabus, right? And they're like, okay, here are all the things that we're going to go over. I was the type of person who, after that class, I would go back to my boyfriend. I'm like almost having a panic attack. So I'm like, oh my gosh, look at all these things. I don't even know anything about what's on this list. Like, I've never done these things before. And he's like, whoa, take a deep breath. Like, that's the point of taking this class. You're not supposed to know everything before you get to it. You're going to learn it as you go. And that has really been encapsulated in my motherhood experience.
You know,
Yes.
so many of the Zen masters and the Eastern thought teachers teach that. Like, one of the most challenging and rewarding things you can do in your life is have a beginner's mind. And to me, that's what watching your children grow older is all about. It's every day is it's a beginning, it's a new start, it's a new awareness. Like, I think of Cheryl, what you went through with your son, and then just becoming a beginner, seeking information, seeking understanding, that's what turns it into an adventure rather than it's all about me or I've blown it or, you know.
Yeah.
I don't think I've been a mom for 21 years. I think I've been a mom for adding up all my kids' ages, because every kid is so different and you learn new things with every child. And like Georgia said, it's an adventure. If you look at it that way, it's a great learning adventure. Sometimes it's really so challenging, but you know, the experiences you have as a mom, you don't get any other way.
Of course, there are also life circumstances that we could never predict that shape who we are as individuals and as mothers. These circumstances may not be directly related to motherhood, but it's impossible to extricate them from motherhood because they affect the way we mom. These can be positive or negative, things like moves, career changes, new friends, opportunities, illnesses for us or our kids, death of children or other family members, miscarriages and fertility issues, divorce, etc. Cheryl talked about several circumstances she hadn't expected.
After my second baby, we had moved away to Arizona, away from both of our families. And my husband working 60 plus hours a week, and husband was never home, and I didn't have a network. And after a year, we moved from Phoenix to Las Vegas. And again, I didn't have a network, and I suffered from some pretty severe postpartum depression that lasted a good year. And I've had kind of those postpartum mood disorders for most of my pregnancies, but I didn't realize until probably my third or fourth baby that that's what it was, because nobody talked about it 20 years ago. And finally, because when I get depressed, I kind of go inward, and I don't reach out, and I don't want to see people and things like that. And so I kind of just relied on my husband, which he's a phenomenal husband and dad and very involved and very helpful. And he was awesome, but he couldn't do it all either. He had to work full time, and I was staying at home. And I could talk about that too, that I think that added to my mood disorders is just not having anything for me. I didn't have anything for me. I was wrapped up in motherhood. And so finally I made some wonderful friends, and we would take each other's kids, and it was just somebody you could call and say, I'm having a terrible day. Can my kids come over and play? And it was never a question. So I do think whether it's friends or, you send your children to childcare, or grandma watches them a couple times a week, but reaching out and having the confidence that that's okay, that we need that network, we need those people, even if it's a nanny that comes into your house or something, we need that help and that network of people.
That brought up a great tangent about getting help.
I hate housework.
Me too.
I can do the other things. I hate housework. And I did finally learn, and pretty early on. And it was when we could barely afford anything. I mean, we were living in the Bay Area and bought a house, which that was unheard of. It was so expensive. We were eating canned corn basically. But I knew that for, that first year we couldn't afford it. But I said, I will do anything. I will go work at McDonald's if I don't have to do the weekly bathrooms and mopping and dusting. I just hate it. And I finally admitted that to myself and said, no matter what else I have to do, I'm going to pay for someone to clean my house twice a month. And I decided to do that early on because I recognized that was somewhere I had to reach out for help, because I just hated that job so much. And I'm sure I could have worked on an attitude shift if I couldn't afford it, or I'd find some way to trade with my husband or something. But it was the first time in my life where I took a stand and I actually, from my center, said, no, this doesn't work for me. I'm not taking this part. I'm going to find another way to do this part that really doesn't work for me. Maybe that's a little different perspective than reaching out for help. I mean, I still took responsibility.
Absolutely is asking for help.
That's a smart way. That's outsourcing. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Correct. Yes.
Where I owned it and just said, this is something that, you know, some people really get satisfaction from scrubbing down a bathroom or whatever. And I love laundry, but I had to pick the parts I didn't love and that I didn't get satisfaction from and outsource it. And that was hard when we didn't have any money at all. Like, it was so tight, but I had to learn to prioritize. You know, would I rather eat canned corn and get a housekeeper, or eat salmon and do the housekeeping? I preferred corn. So.
Good call. That's great.
That's an interesting point that you bring up too, Georgia, that I think we go into motherhood thinking that we have to take on all parts of it, every single thing related to keeping up the house and related to the kids. Like, that is a responsibility that should rest with the mother wholly and fully. And it's just untrue. It puts a lot of pressure on one individual to be able to meet the needs in all these different realms. It brings up the fact that we actually do have a choice, and not choosing to do something about it is a choice. If you're just choosing to go ahead and do something and be frustrated and miserable about it, that's actually a choice. But then there's also other avenues. You could choose to say, actually, this doesn't work for me. I'm going to find somebody else who can do this for me, and I'm going to pay them to do it, and I'm going to move on about my day and be happy. So I think that has come up a lot for me too in various stages of my motherhood. It's just realizing that it's okay to relinquish some things. And that doesn't mean that I'm not woman enough or mother enough to be able to take care of my child or my house. It's just, like you said, in business, people would not think twice about it. If they had some kind of overwhelming task or some kind of void in the organization that needed to be filled, they would just hire somebody. There's no like existential conversation going on. It's just like, we need help, so we're going to pay for it, and that's okay.
You know, I have an experience about having a house cleaner. So I'm the youngest of 7 children. My oldest sister is 16 years older than I am, and I'm 6.5 years younger than the next sibling. So I have a different childhood than my other siblings. My mom had 6 kids in 10 years, and then I came along 6 years later. So by the time I came along, my mom had a housekeeper, and the house was not messy because most people were moved out by then. My oldest sister moved away when I was 3. Anyway, I compared my home to the home I grew up in. And finally, one time my mom came to see me, and I said, Mom, I just cannot keep my house as clean as you did. And she said, Cheryl, you were the youngest and nobody lived at home, and I had a house cleaner once a week. Stop comparing yourself to what I did when you were a baby, because I had a completely different motherhood experience when your 6 other siblings were home. And so I think often we compare our motherhood to what our parents did. And like you both have said, but I did it in a very kind of unhealthy way, like I'm not good enough. And I'm also extremely different from my mother. My mother is amazing. She's this 5-foot tall powerhouse who accomplishes more in a day, even at 88 years old, than I do now. And so again, I felt like I don't do as much as my mom did. I don't accomplish as much as she did, but I got down on the floor and played with my kids. And that's not something that she did. And so I think that we have to start accepting who we are as a mom. And even though we can take guidance from people and find mentors and things like that, we have to really dig deep. Who am I as a mom, and who am I as a person, and utilize those gifts we've been given as a person in our motherhood. Because our kids are sent to us for a reason. And stop trying to be the neighbor next door or your mother or your sister and embrace who you are. But that means you have to learn who you are.
Absolutely. That, I mean, I count that as one of my stage transitions, when I realized that the comparison was futile. And
Yes.
it's actually the seeds of what started How She Moms. Because once I realized that there wasn't a right way, in all these books I was reading, they were all different. And the moms that I saw were all different. Wow, that was a stunning revelation for me, and so liberating. And I started to realize it was just all about priorities, and it wasn't about right and wrong. It was, we all get to choose our own priorities and our own values. And, you know, kale chip mom makes that a priority over the Cheeto mom, and Cheeto mom maybe makes, I don't know, playing with her kids more of a priority, like you were talking about. We all have to give and take a little bit, because you can't prioritize everything. Okay, back to talking about circumstances that impact our experience as mothers. I'll let Georgia finish off this episode with her story.
Nothing has taught me more about myself than motherhood, for sure. But part of that is the experiences I've had as a mother and combining those with motherhood. So I think of, they weren't necessarily related to my children, except for that my children were in my life when they happened. So when I was right after I birthed my second child, and I had a 2-year-old and a 6-week-old baby, I went to my 6-week-old checkup, and the doctor found a lump in my throat. So why he was checking my throat, that wasn't normal for me, but he did. And I remember writing him a big thank you note, because he found a malignant tumor in my thyroid and sent me straight down the hall for a biopsy. And turns out they took my whole thyroid out, and I had 3 malignant tumors, and had to do I didn't have to do chemo, which was really awesome, but I had a big hormonal recovery from that experience, and being postpartum and then going through the cancer thing. And that was an incredible shift for me. I remember getting the phone call when I was holding the baby. It was like 5:00 at night, the witching hour, right? The toddler's
Yes.
on my leg.
Mm-hmm.
And I get a phone call from a physician. He said, "Hey, I just wanted to call you with the results of your biopsy. It looks like you've got malignancy, and we're going to need to schedule surgery within the next 2 or 3 weeks. So give this number a call, and we'll get that scheduled." Click.
Whoa.
And I stood there just in total shock. And of course, I took stock of my life. Like, I didn't know if they were going to open me up and find cancer all through me. You know, this was before they had all the PET scans and all the stuff. You know, this was in 1984 or 86. For all I knew, I could die of this, right? So I remember before going in for surgery and saying to my husband, if this is it, these are some people I want you to date. And these are some people, because I was thinking about, like, I may not be here. And it was a huge shift for me as a mother to think, I'm not always going to be here, period. Like, whether I have cancer or not, or whether I die in 3 months, I'm not always going to be here. And all I have is today. All I have is today to make the best I can make it, faults and all. And that was a huge shift in how I mothered and how I perceived myself as a mother. I was dispensable. I was. And someone else may have to step in and take my place. And that was probably the most pivotal moment of my motherhood. Because when I became dispensable, I stepped off my pedestal, and I faced the fact that these were humans that were going to make their own choices, that were going to have experiences I couldn't control, that were going to have trials like I was having. And all of a sudden I became much more imperfect and able to handle that, right? So that was a huge change, and now an opportunity. Wasn't at the time, didn't feel like an opportunity, but it was such a wildly fantastic opportunity for me to grow up and to step off the pedestal.
Thank you for listening to the How She Moms podcast. If you'd like more resources related to each episode, plus lists of my favorite things and announcements about upcoming topics and events, you can also sign up for my weekly email. You can follow me on Instagram at HowSheMoms and check out HowSheMoms.com, where you can read or listen to past podcast episodes arranged by topic so you can find answers to the problems you're facing right now. Thanks so much for supporting and making How She Moms possible. And special thanks to my mom, Susan Singley, who recorded my theme music. She played this song often when I was a child, and to me, it's part of the soundtrack of motherhood.